Hey, John Gilroy here. People in the business know we have Dr. Zero Trust. We even have General Zero Trust today, the granddaddy of them all, the godfather of Zero Trust. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. Today in the virtual studio, we have world-famous John Kindervag, Chief Evangelist at Illumio. We're going to talk about Zero Trust and browsers and the federal government. And with a guy like this, you talk about anything at all, huh, John?
Oh, we try. Yep, absolutely. Good to talk to you again, John.
Yeah. The reason I brought you in the studio is because I was reading something by Dr. Chase Cunningham, who is brilliant and insightful. And he talked about Zero Trust and browsers. I said, I never thought of that combination. So I thought maybe talk a little bit about browsers, what your ideas are on there, and talk about some of the attacks. I mean, if you read some of the statistics, and I'm at the age where I think, I can make up statistics too. But it looks like a lot of organizations are switching to secure enterprise browsers for many different reasons. And the question is, if you're sitting over at the DOW, should you consider it? Or if you're over at DOI or wherever, should you consider it? And so tell me, John, from your perspective, secure browsers, federal government, mix and match, does it work?
I think the jury's a little bit out on that. I mean, it logically, it makes sense because most of the way we interact with our computational systems as end users is through the browser. So the more that we can do to protect the browser and use the browser as a security mechanism, the better off we are. Now, I am of the fundamental belief that that's not going to stop the bad people from doing bad things, though. So it will stop some of the inadvertent mistakes that the good people do, and there's a lot of technologies that do that, but I don't see it stopping a Snowden or a Manning or somebody of that level who's a determined attacker and knows how to get around the controls that allow you to just use a different browser. So the secure browser people try to make a claim that, well, you won't be able to use a different browser, but I've been around long enough that I tend to discount a lot of those claims. So we'll have to see. I think the proof will come out over time.
So it sounds like the application might be to prevent phishing attacks. Is that what you're indirectly referencing here?
I think that's one of the things. I mean, there's already good technology that it prevents phishing attacks. Email gateways do a really, really good job of that. We just see not enough of them rolled out.
That's interesting. So you're famous for Zero Trust. So the topic of browsers and Zero Trust, is it part of the discussion, or should we just focus on microsegmentation or standards from the federal government? Is this part of the discussion?
Well, I mean, the whole system is part of the discussion because Zero Trust is a way to think about cybersecurity, but it focuses on what you're trying to protect. So what we call the protect surface, the inversion of the attack surface. So we can shrink the attack surface down orders of magnitude to something very small and easily known called the protect surface. So you might have a protect surface that's a particular data set. You might have it that's a critical asset, like a OT asset, for manufacturing or for power generation, or you might have a service like DNS or DHCP that's in a protect surface. So protect surfaces are what's actually been missing from a lot of the federal government messaging on Zero Trust, and the Department of Homeland Security has just come out with new guidance that brings that into the discussion. So that's probably the big exciting news from the federal side towards Zero Trust.
And if you look at protecting the service, it sounds like a military phrase, doesn't it? Let's go over to the DOW and talk about them. And they have so much data that's coming in every day. I mean, there's a podcast in town called Feds at the Edge. I mean, there's remote stuff being accumulated. I read the figure. I don't even believe the amount of information coming every day for the DoD. So how does one inventory that? How do you set the standard for what is the data that we're going to protect?
Well, that's the tough thing. I mean, you kind of have to have that from leadership, and leadership tends to know what's the most important stuff that they have. So, I'm going out next week. Next week I'll be going to Huntsville to brief some military leaders on zero trust. And so they tend to know what they need to protect. It's pretty simple in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of data that's flown around, and because in the U.S. federal government, you have to know what your high value assets are. That's one of the critical requirements. They tend to know what those high value assets are, and those are the things that you want to protect. So zero trust is about focusing on what you're trying to protect, not necessarily on the technology that you're going to use to do it, because that's going to be dependent upon the protect surface itself.
So the protect surface could include legacy applications. And
it could,
so,
absolutely.
So do you dance around those, or how does that incorporate into like this new DHS policy?
Well, no, I mean, if you say I have a legacy application, there's always a way to secure it using the principles of zero trust. Mainframes, there's ways to segment those. You can put them in their own protect surface and segment them away from everything else. And I think the thing about legacy, I've come to the conclusion, along with some other friends of mine, we did some discussions about this. A legacy application isn't legacy if it's making you money. That's in the private sector, and in the government sector, if it's still useful, right? So I think sometimes we think anything that isn't modern and in the cloud is legacy, but especially in the Department of War, they have a lot of things that they don't want to put in the cloud, that it's just too dangerous to put on the cloud, and so they're going to keep those things on premise probably forever, and I think that's a good thing. And so, but those things can still be put in a zero trust environment. In fact, we do that for some government and Department of War clients.
If you have a podcast, you listen to the podcast. So I listen to all kinds of podcasts, and some of the smartest people I've listened to are from these labs. Air Force has got a lab, and there's a Pacific Northwest lab. So listen to a podcast by a guy, and he talks about OT and IT, and he made an observation that most people don't make. He said, a lot of the critical infrastructure that they use is owned by the private sector. So how can they have control over that if they try to establish a zero trust approach over at a lab like this?
I'm really not sure what he means by owned by the private sector exactly. I mean, if you're talking about a power generation station, yeah, it's owned by the private sector. So you have to encourage the private sector to put that in the right type of zero trust environment. So yeah, I don't know that you can have centralized control in a democracy, right? So yeah. It relates to the political system that we're in, and I kind of like the political system we're in.
Yeah, interesting. All kinds of new devices are popping into systems these days, satellites, all kinds of new. I keep thinking of sensors and data, especially the DOW. So should this be a consideration when you design a zero trust policy? What about new types of data that are going to come in the future? Is that part of the flexibility of applying zero trust?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, zero trust doesn't care what is protecting. It has no sense of that at all. All you as a leader in the world that you control have to figure out what's important in your world and then start protecting that. So again, one of the design principles is we design from the inside out instead of the outside in. So don't start with the edge and move inward. We start inside and move outward, and that's the secret to it. And most people, we've all learned to build networks from the outside in. That's how we always did it. We started at the edge where we got the internet connectivity and moved inward. And by the time we got to the inside of the network, we didn't care where things were plugged into, because all we cared about was the transport of packets. And that is the thing that kind of has led to this proliferation of data and assets that we don't even know where they're at.
Yeah. If you look around, see what's going on in the DoD, they have a bunch of different pilots, zero trust pilots going on now. Are you involved in any of those, or what do you think that's a good approach to have several pilots and figure something out, or is it too diverse to even limit itself to 18 or 20 different pilots?
Well, I mean, they have pilots and they actually have environments that are secured in a zero trust manner. So with the executive order of President Biden in 2021, followed by M2209 from the Office of Management and Budget. And then I was involved in the President's NSTAC, National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee. We did a report on zero trust as well. So there's a lot of information out there, and every federal agency has a zero trust program manager and a zero trust program management office and a zero trust budget. So there's no excuse for federal agencies to not be adopting zero trust. They've got all the tools, they've got all the incentives, they've got all the money. They just have to have the kind of the willingness to do it, you know.
So what challenges do you see? Challenges of the DOW, challenges in the civilian agencies. What do you see to implementing zero trust then?
A lot of it is challenges around lack of leadership and a lack of willingness to want to do something new. That's probably the biggest thing. We need strong, powerful leaders to pull this off, because the people who have to do the job are mostly managing their own downside risks. So they'd rather do nothing than do the thing that might make things better in their organization, because they can say, well, if something bad happens, they go, well, I didn't do that, right? They hold their hands up, I didn't do that. And so there's sort of incentive to do nothing, because we spend so much time looking for who we can blame if something goes wrong. And it's that blame game that's pretty dangerous.
So, John, is this a characteristic only of the federal government, or do you see that in private industry as well?
No, it's a characteristic of human beings.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of big companies in Chicago or Detroit, and they're going to have the same approach. Is like, I got to protect my job, and I'll let John take the chance, or Ralph take the chance, or something. And I just see this as, I think a lot of challenges in the federal government. People think, well, it's only because we're here within the Beltway and we're restrained by all these compliance requirements and everything else. But I think it's more of a human resistance to change issue. I think you're right about that. So how do you overcome that?
You overcome that by getting leadership to push it from the top down. So, you know, Biden's executive order, everybody's doing it, whether they're doing it begrudgingly or enthusiastically, it does not matter. And I've seen this in the private sector as well. When a top leader says we're going to do it, then people do it. They fight about it until their boss's boss says we're going to do it. And then they go, okay, I'm on board. So it's all about incentives, right? The great Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner who died last year, I like to say, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. In cybersecurity, we have a lot of perverse incentives, so we have a lot of perverse outcomes. And changing the incentive structure is very hard, because that's an organizational and a leadership and a cultural change.
When it comes to zero trust, the first pillar is identity. And so what kind of companies do you like to work with, or what kind of companies have gained respect in the federal government with working with identity and all kinds of identity?
That's the first pillar in the government worldview, but I think that was probably not a great way to think about zero trust, right? Because it was a misunderstanding of Chase Cunningham's ZTX framework, which was about what technology might go inside of a protect surface. I never look at the technology first. I look at what I need to protect. And yeah, I'll need some identity probably, and I'll need some of this and some of that and some of that, but it's going to be dependent upon what I'm protecting. I don't start with the pillars because if I try to do that, I would fail. You'll never get a significant amount of maturity if you try to do all identity first and then sequentially move across the pillars, which is what people try to do because they misunderstood the intention behind it.
Everyone's talking about AI today, and I'm tempted to bring it up, but I'm not. I'm going to talk about people trying to evaluate AI and saying, well, if a code generation, this and that, and they try to evaluate it that way. So how does one evaluate a zero trust implementation in a federal agency? Is it just compliance? How would you evaluate it?
Well, I mean, I have a maturity model that I use. I've done webinars on that, done it for Defense Acquisition University and other people like that, where I look at the maturity across the 5 steps of zero trust. The thing you need to understand is the 5-step model of implementing it, defining the protect surface, Mapping the transaction flow is step 2. Step 3 then becomes architecture. Which technology, right? Step 4 is policy, because policy is everything, and all you do is allow or deny. And zero trust starts with a deny all rules. So we're going to then just turn on only allow rules. John is allowed to get access to this. John is allowed to get access to that. And then by default, not anything else. And then step 5 is monitor and maintain, where we take all the telemetry and we re-inject it back in the system to make the system stronger and stronger over time. And so when you use that 5-step model and compare it to a traditional Carnegie Mellon maturity model, the 5 levels of maturity, you can put that in an orthogonal grid and determine the maturity of a protect surface. I tend to look at the maturity of the protect surface, not the maturity of the technology, because it just seems to work better.
Boy, that's like a 20-year baseball coach analyzing something and saying, "Hey, let's take a look at this swing, and the important things are your feet are." It's boiling it down. It's like someone who's done this a long time and seen a lot of mistakes being made. Where someone may have, "Hey, John Kindervag, here's my checklist," and you go throw up your hands and go, "Oh, checklists are great." And then we have them all over the federal government, in the commercial world too, I guess.
Everybody has a checklist, and when you get checklist focused, you end up buying technology you don't need because it's on the checklist. So you go, oh, I'm going to put this in because it's on the checklist, but you didn't need that necessarily to protect the thing that you were trying to protect, because that particular technology doesn't have any impact in the way the packet is manipulated as it reaches that resource. So it's all based upon the flow of the packet to the resource.
Speaking of resources, you mentioned webinar that you've done in the past. If someone is listening to this, maybe they work for an agency and maybe they got burned once or twice by maybe representations that were made. Where can people go? What give me 3 podcasts to listen to, maybe some videos, or maybe a conference or something. Where do you go? Where do you suggest people in the business here to learn more?
Well, at Illumio, we have our Zero Trust Hub. So I have a lot of articles that I've written there, things on incentives. I've written about incentives and AI, both for Financial Times of London, for example. I've got a lot of webinars I've done. You can just search around for things. So I spend a lot of time sitting right here talking to people like you, and helping people understand what they need to do to be successful in rolling out their zero trust environment.
I've been around software sort of you for a long time, and it took a while before they come up with a maturity framework. And is that what we're talking about for zero trust? Is a certain level of maturity? You talked about maturity earlier, that you can look at 5 agencies, go, well, this isn't black and white, John. Here's A, B, and C, and here's 5 organizations. And is there a grade? Is there a level, or is there a capability? How would you differentiate someone's?
Well, I look at the protect surface. Each protect surface on a 5x5 matrix. So you can actually score it, from 0, meaning I'm doing nothing, to 25, which means I'm highly mature. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never seen a 25, nor do I think you actually need to get to that place to have enough friction to keep the attacker out of your system, right? So what you're trying to do is make your system hard enough to attack that somebody's going to go on to attack somebody else, right? Because the attackers have a return on investment in almost all cases. I mean, there's a little bit of a difference in certain nation state things, and but it's all over the government. I mean, the first proponents, the first stuff that I did was for the U.S. federal government 15 years ago. And there's a lot of things I can't talk about, but I've spent a fair amount of time inside the Beltway.
Well, that's a Washington, D.C. type phrase. I love that phraseology there. If you focus on data, and we go back to our friends at the Pentagon there, the DOW folks, they're coming up with something called a data model document, DMD. And I think what they're trying to do is just trying to figure out which data is on John Kindervag's list to be protected. So I just come back to the immense amount of data coming in and how to protect it, and you're saying that senior leaders may have a good idea. So what about creating the correct data to protect, and then I guess the word would be continuously monitoring that the zero trust principles are in effect. Does that go hand in hand?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes hand in hand. I mean, the problem we have is we tend to classify data based upon analog paper models from the 70s and 80s, and that stuff doesn't work very well in the digital world. I mean, if you try to say to somebody, what's the difference between top secret and classified, they go, oh, well, I can't really articulate it. I know it when I see it. Well, your computer doesn't know it when it sees it. And so we've got to figure out different ways of doing that. And then funny thing about classification, what I discovered when I did research on it, and I wrote about this a lot when I was at Forrester Research, that the federal government tends to overclassify things so that you can't get access to it because information is power and I don't want you to have that information, versus the private sector tends to underclassify things because I want things to move fast and I don't really care about the security of it. And so we haven't figured that out. That's a very large, difficult nut to crack. We continue to work on it, but we're a long ways out. Maybe AI will help. Maybe it won't. Who knows?
Well, that's a sage observation about AI. I'm kind of pulling back a little bit on some of the positive things I'm reading about AI, and I'm just wondering where it's going to lead. Let's try to maybe end this conversation now. I'll put a link to that reference we had earlier, and next time we'll tee up our next conversation, focus maybe on AI and some forward-looking aspects of zero trust in the federal government, and maybe see what's going to go on here in 2026. And wow. That almost seems like too far to ask. What's going on in 2026? And well, the next time we'll try to predict something. I mean, it's hard enough to predict the next 3 weeks, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I think recently we've seen attacks on AI agents where then the AI agent becomes the attacker. And so you're going to see agentic AI become an insider threat. And that's kind of the most serious thing we're looking at right now. Wow. So I've written the foreword for 2 books on zero trust and AI already just this year, and it's a big topic. But I think AI gives us an advantage over the attackers. I really do. I think if we can use it right, we'll be able to dissect the data in ways that we've never thought about before, and we'll be able to take automated responses to stop them in their tracks. So I'm looking forward to those days happening.
Hold that thought. Next time we're up to bat, we'll dive into AI. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, John Kindervag, who is the Chief Evangelist at Illumio, ILLUMIO. Thanks, John.
Thanks.